Hello everyone, today I'm going to be doing an active skill tier list. This idea was given to me by another player named MadJ in the official Discord, and I thought it sounded like a really cool and fun thing to do. The timing of this is a little awkward, as just recently the devs mentioned in the Discord they plan to make an announcement for the upcoming patch on Monday the 20th, which is just a couple of days from me recording this and having it go live on YouTube. They also mentioned they plan to hopefully have the patch come out later the same week of the announcement. There are going to be balance changes with this next patch, which means some of these abilities will get buffs and potentially move up in the list. I don't expect any nerfs, but I guess that is also possible, so some of these may even drop down. So I do know that this means in about a week time of this going up, this video won't be entirely accurate, but I also don't really feel like waiting around. So I'm currently just planning to do an update video for the balance changed abilities later on after I've tested them out and give you new placements for them. Before I go into tiering these, some ground rules for the sort of logic I'm using to determine where I'm placing them. I consider which heroes have these abilities and how heavily does the ability impact those heroes' performances. For most of these abilities, they're going to be class-based, so it will be heavily weighed in the class's favor, but I am also going to be taking into account and into consideration how effective these abilities are on some of those heroes that don't belong in that class. For example, Blood Hex is primarily an Arcanist move, but there is another hero that has Blood Hex that is not an Arcanist, so just to give you an example of what I'm sort of talking about. I am also not just evaluating these skills in a vacuum. Some of these skills sound really good on paper, but I am also going to consider how good the skill is as a skill point investment compared to other skills the hero has open to them. So this ability may be good, but if there's a bunch of other abilities that are all better than that, then it's going to drop down in the tier list. And then finally, of course, as everyone would expect, how impactful these moves actually are in the battlefield. Now, what does each tier mean? S tier, this is an extremely powerful ability that is crucial to the hero's performance that have access to it, almost to a point of reliance, and for a couple cases, definitely to a point of reliance. A tier, this is a strong skill that you will use very often with consistent results. Often these skills are very good at comboing with many other skills from other heroes. B tier, this is sort of your average type of skill. It's good, but nothing super impactful. You still use these with some regularity for one reason or another. C tier, this is the tier where the sort of niche skills go. They aren't that strong or require niche situations to really shine. You may take some of these, but you don't use it as often as you usually have better choices for most situations. And then finally at the bottom, D tier, these are just straight up bad skills. You only use these skills pretty much when you absolutely have to, and even then, there are often other skills that may just be objectively stronger. This is just the best or only option this hero may have to cover this type of situation. I hope that made sense. If it's still a little hazy or confusing, I'm sure it'll start to make more sense as I go through the abilities and place them. And with all of that out of the way, let's get into tiering some skills. I don't want this to be super long, so I'll try to keep my reasoning for each of these placements concise. Kicking off the tier list, we have Stigma. This is a debuff ability that Mordred and Dagonet have. They're the only ones that have it. It's a very cheap, decent range debuff that applies vulnerability, 20% up to 30% with the upgrade, and I think this ability is a little underrated. It's actually pretty good. It can definitely make the difference between getting a kill and not getting a kill for very cheap. So I think I'm going to put this in A tier. I do use Mordred a lot, and I find myself using Stigma to help secure kills with a good amount of frequency. Next is Cleave. This is primarily a champion move that Mordred also has access to. It's a pretty decent AoE, something you're mostly using earlier on in the game. Getting 2 targets, sometimes 3, with some consistency. It has good damage with the upgrades on it. I think I'm going to put this in B tier. It's solid, but nothing like crazy. Next is Death Strike. This is actually a pretty interesting move because this doesn't belong to any specific class. This is really sort of spread out amongst a number of select heroes. This move, off the top of my head, belongs to Sir Gawain, the Red Knight, and Sir Kay. And it's a really high damage move, 170%. I think that's the highest base damage percentage of any move. However, it has negative armor breaking, so on the two defenders, this will have 0 armor break. And its damage is greatly reduced for every point of armor that the target has. So this is really dependent on the target either being like prone or getting a backstab or having no armor, but it can get really high damage. It's mostly on defenders, and for them it can get them up to like triple digit, which is really good for them. I'm not going to say this is a niche move, but it's definitely not a really powerful move, despite the fact that it does have good damage when you find openings for it. Next is Flurry. This move primarily also belongs to defenders, but also belongs to Boadicea. Her version is different. For her, it only does 50% damage, which makes sense as she's a Vanguard, where for defenders, it's 100% damage. This move is much better for her, because even though it's 50%, her higher damage bonuses still has her out-damaging the defender version, which is 100. And you're not really using this a whole lot, at least how I play my defenders. You're generally playing them defensively. You're not going to do a whole lot of good damage with this move, so it's kind of niche for defenders, but strong for Boadicea. I am going to put it in B tier overall. Next is Recuperate. This is a tier 3 defender move that gives them a large chunk of temporary HP to really help them just hunker down during an enemy turn and prevent them from taking any actual damage. And the main problem with this move is, though, it's just kind of unnecessary. There's just so many other passives and defensives you can get with your defenders where they already, even on very hard, in the endgame, they're just not taking a lot of damage. So while it's not bad, there's just better ways to mitigate damage to your defenders than Recuperate. It just becomes unnecessary. So unfortunately, this is going to be our first D tier skill. Up next is Power Attack. This is an amazing move that champions have access to. High base damage, bonus to armor breaking, so you can really just shred through large amounts of enemy armor very easily. It has very good upgrades on it for even higher damage bonuses, and you can even spec a stun into it. Probably one of the best single target attacks in the game, in my opinion. I'm going to put it in A tier. And also, just for the record, I'm not really going to be ranking these a whole lot within each tier, because that would be very difficult, and I don't even know if I could do that. Next, another champion skill, Earthshaker, and this is an amazing ability. This is probably the best active skill that champions get access to. It is a line attack of 6 tiles long after the upgrades, really high base damage. It can't be blocked, it goes through cover, it goes through obstacles, even if there's a wall between you and the target. Just the ability to get so many multi-hits with this one move. Getting 2 is very easy, 3 is like the average, and when it lines up getting like 5 or 6 targets even, it's just godly. This move is amazing. I'm putting this in S tier. Kick, much like Death Strike, is sort of a unique ability that isn't specific to any given class. There's just a couple characters that have access to it. I know Sir Kay and the Red Knight have it. I can't recall if anyone else does, but it's a very cheap, low cooldown, we're talking 1 AP, 1 cooldown move that can apply knockdown. So it's a really good CC maneuver. There's basically no damage on it. You're just taking it to get the knockdown and knockback on it. I think because the ability is so small, you're not really going to be using it a whole lot unless you're taking one of these two characters. And even then, you're primarily focusing on damage with them. I'm going to put it in B tier. It's a good debuff. It's a good CC ability. I just don't find myself using it a whole lot. Next is another champion ability. You can see we kind of have a few of them lined up here. We have Whirlwind. Now, when I first saw this ability, I was really excited for it. You attack every unit that is adjacent to your champion for really high base damage, I think 150% for 6 AP, so it is a bit expensive, but you can hit like 4 or 5 targets. And again, unfortunately, the average that you're looking for and should be expecting is like 3. You can just kind of replicate this ability with other skill picks and passives that champions have access to for cheaper AP cost as well. It is higher base damage, so there are times when this can be useful, but this is a niche ability for me, so it is in C tier. Next is Preparedness, which is a tier 3 Sir K specific move. You use all of your AP, and for every 2 AP you spend, you get a counter attack. So it is technically more AP efficient for your attacks, being 2 versus 4, but it requires you to get hit first, so you need to take damage to dish it back. I'm not a huge fan of this. I would prefer to just kill them on my turn rather than kill them on their turn and take hits in the process. So this is like super niche to get use out of this, to the point where I don't even really consider this niche. There's just better plays here than using this move in my opinion, so I'm going to put it in D tier. And now for defensive stance, this is sort of a basic move that your average champion has access to. It's a really good defensive move to increase their tankiness for one turn if you're expecting your champion to take a lot of hits. It provides extra armor and extra temporary HP, even debuff resistance. I think a lot of players lean on this move, especially earlier on in the campaign on higher difficulties, to really avoid a lot of damage to their champions, so for that reason I'm putting it in A. Up next, it looks like we have a series of marksman moves, and as it currently stands, marksman moves in general just really underperform damage-wise. So none of these are going to be great. They're good in the context of their own class, but comparing them to what you want to bring to your team comp, they don't do great. Poison Arrow is a decent move. Most marksmen have access to this, and thanks to their Alchemist passive, they can get this to be one of their highest single target damage moves. It does have a debuff, even though poison isn't very great, and it's also cheap. I'm going to put this in B tier just because if you are bringing a marksman, you're using this move pretty much on cooldown with them, and it's one of their best moves. Next is Fire Arrow. The damage on this isn't great. It doesn't get as many damage bonuses to it like Poison Arrow. The burn dot is alright, but their lower base damage not being super great means the dot isn't super great, so it's kind of niche. Up next is Aim Shot, also C tier. It's a niche move. Half the time you'll actually do more damage using multiple attacks rather than sinking all of your AP into this one attack. You're largely only using this if you don't have enough AP to do 2 attacks. Like you have 6 AP, which is enough for an attack and a half, so you go with this. Dash is the marksman mobility move. It's a really good mobility move. It has good range, it has a good cooldown, it doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity. So this is an A tier move, but it's on marksmen who aren't great, so it's like a really good move on a class that isn't good. So that kind of drops it down to B tier. The only one that has access to dash that isn't a marksman is Lucan. So for him, I would put it in A tier, but for its general use, it's a B tier. Now we have Poison Bomb, D tier. This is one of the worst skills in the entire game. It's a tier 3 skill, 3x3 AoE that does 70% weapon damage, and I have that number memorized because it's the exact amount as Fire Blast, which Ector has access to, only it's worse than Fire Blast because it's a tier 3 move instead of tier 2, and it does poison damage, which means lost enemies are immune to it. The only reason why you take this on your marksman is because it's the only AoE they get access to, but it is still garbage. Getting into some Vanguard skills, we have Jump. This is a mobility move that just Vanguards have access to. It's super cheap, low cooldown of 2 after the upgrade. It lets you jump past enemies over terrain, so it's highly effective at getting your Vanguards into a position where they can stealth and start dealing damage, or getting them away from enemies into a safe spot so they can then stealth. This is a very easy A tier ability. Bear Trap is a very useful ability early in the game for your Vanguards. They don't really have enough of the skills to just be chaining their stealth and running around like crazy, backstabbing everything. So you're going to be laying down traps a lot to help protect your party. Early in the game, probably a B tier, but as you get later into the game, you just really stop using traps. They just really fall off damage-wise, and Vanguard just gets so good at running around and stealth stabbing stuff that this becomes a very niche ability. So this goes in C tier. Next is Hide. I mean, this is an S tier, obviously. I don't know how anyone would expect otherwise. This is literally the whole reason why Vanguard is so good. This is integral to their playstyle. You hide, you sneak up on enemies, you get a surprise attack bonus, you get a backstab bonus, hit them for like 300 damage, take a step back, re-hide, and do the same thing. This adds so much survivability to them because hide becomes so cheap, you can pretty much guarantee you are always going to be in stealth. S tier, one of the best abilities in the game, if not the best ability in the game. Next is Throwing Dagger. This is a good move for Vanguards because it does give them a ranged move, but it is kind of niche. You're pretty much only using this if you can't reach the enemy or something is preventing you from reaching the enemy. So you want to get at least an attack in, you'll use Throwing Dagger, but you're pretty much always going to be looking for doing melee attacks. So it does good damage just because it's on a Vanguard, but it's niche for the same reason that there's much better ways to deal damage with them. Gas Trap is another trap skill Vanguards get access to, as well as the Marksman Sir Damas. And for all of them, it's not great. It costs 6 AP, so it's very expensive. If you're using this ability, that's going to be most of your turn. And as I mentioned before, traps just aren't very strong. They fall off later in the game. And because this one is poison damage, it does no damage against the Lost. So, D tier. Jumping attack, I'm going to put in B tier. It is similar to Throwing Dagger, where it's an efficiency move for Vanguards, where you're going to use it if you can't afford to run up to them and hit them. But it does more damage than Throwing Dagger, and I find myself using this more than Throwing Dagger. So, yeah, I'm putting it in B tier. Next is Force Bolt, which is just the basic attack for Ector. The Fairy Knight has it as a range skill, not his basic attack, and Sir Dagonet. I mean, it's just your sort of standard auto attack. It's the primary way you deal damage with Dagonet and Ector for a good portion of the time you have them from early to mid game. So, yeah, B tier, pretty much the standard definition of a B tier skill. Blood Hex is an Arcanist skill as well as a Black Knight skill. It's D tier on the Black Knight, but I'm primarily going to ignore that for this just because of how good it is with Arcanists. The effect itself is alright. Bleed is a decent status effect, and the damage reduction is very useful, especially early on. But once you get later into the game, you're mostly just using this for spell spamming and cycling your cooldowns, and it is very good for that. So I'm going to put this in B tier. Slowing Hex, though, this is going to go in A tier. I love this ability. It's very good at keeping enemies away from your party, keeping your party safe. It's super cheap, super low cooldown, so it's very, very good for spell spamming. Fire Blast, as I mentioned earlier, the 70% damage 3x3, but it has very good upgrades on it to have it do lingering extra damage after the initial hit. It's nothing crazy, but it is the first AoE you will get access to in the game, and you find yourself using it pretty regularly if you're using Sir Ector. Death Hex is probably the strongest Hex out of anything an Arcanist has access to. This is an S tier because with high enough Hex intensity, you can eliminate half or more of your enemy's vitality bar. And for high vitality targets like Fomorians, this can be literally hundreds of damage. This move helps set up your party to get kills on targets to such a level that it's unrivaled by any other move in the game. This move is just so strong. I believe in the upcoming balance patch, there's a current bug with Hex intensity calculation where this move is actually stronger than it should be, so this may drop down after the patch, we'll see, but in its current version, to me, this is an easy S tier. Wall of Flame is the poor man's ice wall. Ector gets access to it in tier 3. It's okay, damage isn't great, the debuffs on it are alright. It's pretty niche. Drain Life is a Sir Tristan specific move, does terrible damage, but it relies on you hitting a lot of targets with it, and he will heal based off of the amount of damage he does for each target. So it's very easy to heal back all of his HP with this move if you hit enough targets, but it's a defensive only move for him, and ideally you shouldn't be taking damage on him anyways because he's a Vanguard. So, niche. Smoke Bomb, Also a Sir Tristan move, very powerful, protects your party from being targeted by any ranged attacks, but you also can't shoot outside of it as well. And it's really strong because it messes with the enemy AI a little bit. Their ranged units, if they can't target you, they'll think they're just out of range, so they'll run closer. So after the 1 or 2 turns this lasts, they'll be so much closer, it makes them very easy for your team to kill them. I don't think this is anything super crazy or broken, but because of the way it kind of messes with the AI, I do think this is a very good A tier skill. Freezing attack is primarily on Sages and Sir Gawain. Sages shouldn't be spending too much time in melee because they aren't very durable, but it's very good for getting them in, stunning an enemy, doing what attacks they want to, and then getting out. On Gawain, this is an amazing move because he's a defender. He can sit next to him all day long, be pretty much fine, and just keep putting freezes on whoever is messing with him. On a Gawain, I'd probably put this at A tier, but for Sages, it's a B tier, so averaging it out, I'm going to put it like upper end of B tier. Even on Sages, it's a pretty good move. Bless, this is an easy A tier. It's a very powerful damage buff to melee damage. You put this on your Vanguard, you put this on your champion, and they're going to be going around just laying even more hurt and wiping out good chunks of the enemy team. It has really good upgrades on it too to enable this further, as well as buff your party. Inspire, I mean, this is S tier. Everyone knows this is S tier. It's an amazing move. You're giving 2 AP to your entire party and back to the caster, so it's a net cost of 1 on them. It can lower cooldowns. It can cure status effects like blind, stun. It can grant an extra movement AP. It's just an amazing move. Glove of Protection is a pretty important skill to Sages. If you think your Sage is going to be taking hits, you're going to use this. It creates a very strong buffer for them to prevent them from taking any serious damage. B tier. Next is Ice Wall. Some Sages have access to this, and Morgana, the Arcanist, has access to this. It's equally good on all of them. If you want to cheese the AI and break them, it's an S tier ability if you lock them in a corner, because most enemies will not try to break the Ice Wall for some reason. Some do. I don't know what determines what enemy will try to break it and what ones won't. Most don't, though. But ignoring that cheese factor, it's still a very strong move. It's good for blocking off paths so your enemies have to take long ways around to reach your party. It's good for just making them having to go around it and waste more AP on movement. And with upgrades, you can break it and have it freeze enemies. And I am aware there is a cheese with this ability as well, a second one, where killing it with your champions counts as an enemy, so it gives them extra stacks of rage. I try to ignore the cheese factors a little bit, as I feel this is an unintended use for it, but even without the cheese factor, I think it's a very solid A tier ability. Guard is a strong defender move that most defenders have access to. Largely, it's just giving the rest of your party a large amount of armor to basically weather out an enemy turn if you think they're going to be putting in a lot of hits on you. It's nothing crazy, but it's a good survivability move for your team. Goes in B tier. Taunt is a very powerful defender move, defensively and offensively, because your defenders are essentially immortal by the end game, and even throughout all stages of the game, hands down the tankiest units in your party, so directing attacks at them really spares a lot of damage on the rest of your party, and due to the taunt, it can force enemies at your defender, making them take opportunity attacks. Some people swear by this move, saying it's one of the strongest abilities in the game, and I think so to a degree. I just don't think it's quite S tier, so I'm going to put this in A tier. Piercing Shot is a move only Sir Yvain has. It's an AoE line attack, but its damage is just so low. I'm pretty much never using this, even though it's an AoE move. For a marksman, one of the few, the damage is just way too low, I think, especially for the cost, which is the same problem that I run into with Rain of Arrows. It's better than Poison Bomb. Again, I think this is only Sir Yvain, but it's also very expensive, and the damage still just isn't good enough to warrant the cost. Encouragement is like Inspire, but way less range. You need to be closer to the caster. So because of that, I'm going to put it in A tier, but it's still extremely strong, and with upgrades, it can even provide a damage boost. Just the range limitation on it, I think, is a pretty significant limiting factor for it. Mark Target. This is a Sir Bors skill that applies vulnerability, but only to ranged damage. and he's also a marksman, so you only get use out of this if you're either bringing a bunch of marksmen or some arcanists who are going to be using like their force bolt or whatever on them. This is kind of the ultimate definition of a niche ability. If marksmen were stronger, this may be higher. Next is another Sir Bor's move, Smothering Shot. It's a pretty strong move, high base damage, applies silence, and it can apply slow, strong debuffs. I think this manages to make it way into B tier even as a marksman ability, just because if you are bringing him, this is a move you're going to be using a lot, just like Poison Arrow. Ice Spikes does not belong to a specific class, but it does exist on Lancelot, Morgause, and Morgana. I can't remember anyone else, and the effectiveness of this move is different for every single one of them. On Lancelot, it's a very strong move. He's in melee a lot, so this cone ability is going to get tons of use with him. Morgause, she's largely going to be spamming spells from a distance, but she does get in melee from time to time as a sage, and she is effective there. And then Ice Spikes will be useful in that case, so it's kind of mid. And then on Morgana, it's a good backup move, but that's just it. It's a backup move. You're primarily going to be using other abilities. You will never be moving her closer to an enemy to use this on them. So for Lancelot, it's A tier. For Morgause, it's B tier. For Morgana, it's C tier. So I'm going to put it in B tier on average. Ice Shield is probably the strongest defensive ability in the game. It just lets you ignore up to 4 attacks over the course of up to 4 turns. This doesn't work on area abilities that don't target the hero specifically, but this gives so much extra tankiness to what are normally very frail units like Morgause, like Fairy Knight, like Sir Geraint. The fact that it can just let you be so much more aggressive with them just goes to show how powerful this is as a defensive ability. I think this is S tier. Now, I really like Chain Lightning. I think I may like it more than most players. I think it does good damage, and I think it has such a high spread for its AoE because its range is determined on who your target is, and it can just stretch further and further. This lets you hit such a widespread amount of enemies that no other AoE can match, as well as applying shock, which I think is one of the best debuffs in the game. I do think it's an S tier ability. I'm using this on cooldown with Morgause and Mordred, the only people with access to this. It's just hands down their best ability, and I think contributes heavily whenever you bring this into any party comp. Thunderstorm, only Morgause has access to, I'm pretty sure. It's a tier 3 ability. Damage is not great, but it's a very high AoE size, larger than others, and it applies shock. And that's the main reason for it. You do this to just apply shock to a ton of enemies and reduce the amount of AP they have, so I think this is an A tier move. Crippling Shot is a Sir Damas specific move. It has slow, it has knockback, it has high base damage for a marksman, but again, it's still a marksman, so generally the damage isn't going to be great. It's pretty much on par with Smothering Shot, I think, so low B tier. Sprint is the worst move in the game. It only exists on Sir Bedivere, and I don't know why they gave this to him. It consumes all of your AP, turning it into, I think, 2 movement AP for each regular AP. So he can run all over the map, but then he can't do anything else, because he has no regular AP left. With upgrades, you can make it so he doesn't provoke attacks of opportunity, but in tier 3, you get a skill that does that on all type of movement anyways. So it's completely useless by tier 3. You use this as a way to, like, escape your enemies, but then what? You can't go into stealth, so if there's range units, he's still a target. I mean, this move sucks. You use this, and you can do nothing else on your turn. Lightning Trap is probably the strongest trap. It can apply shock, it has an extended trigger range, so they don't have to step on it directly. It has good damage for a trap, so it's not bad, but the only one that has it is Bedivere, and he's kind of designed to be this trap master kind of character, and even on him though, traps are so weak right now, you're just better off playing him like a normal Vanguard. Just stealth and stab stuff. I want to put it in B, just because if you're using Sir Bedivere, you're probably using these. But I'm going to drop it down to C. Like high C, I guess. And it hurts me to put it there. Leap Attack is S tier. If you've seen my Black Knight videos, you know why. This move single-handedly makes the Black Knight the strongest champion in the game, in my opinion. Champions struggle with mobility, Leap Attack is mobility, and it does damage, and it has AoE. It just grants so much AP efficiency to the Black Knight, where the only one that comes close to him, I think, is the White Knight. This move is just absolutely nuts, and its ability to combo off of so many other passive skills within the champion skill tree is just absurd. We have Mach, which is the Red Knight's version of Taunt. It has a higher range than Taunt, but can only target one enemy, and with an upgrade up to 2. It is just a weaker Taunt overall. I don't think it's bad, but I'm going to put it in B tier. Throwing Axe, the only one that has this is Red Knight, and it is a ranged move that has Knockdown, which is a very strong status effect, one of the best. And it has decent damage, especially for a defender. I'm going to put this in B tier, because if you're bringing the Red Knight, you're going to be using this ability pretty regularly. Blessed Weapon is another very powerful move specific to the White Knight, primarily because it does provide a damage bonus, but also provides an extra AP per kill. So the White Knight has the highest AP per kill out of all the champions. So, as you all know, having higher AP generation means more abilities you do in one turn, which means the more kills you get in a turn, which is kind of the theme for champions. I don't think it's quite as good as Leap Attack, because I think the efficiency of Leap Attack outweighs the generation of Blessed Weapon. This is hard. I think this is either like top of A tier or also S tier. I think I will put it in S tier for now. I may rearrange some things at the end. Holy Armor, that's just a defensive move for the White Knight. You don't really need this on him. Basically, it's become invincible for one turn because you get so much armor out of this. I generally don't take this, but I do see a use for it, so I think it's niche. Desecrated Ground is a very strong move for Sir Dagonet. It's specific to him, and you can spam it pretty easily, and it does kind of mess with the AI a bit because of the pathing. They want to try and go around it, but because you can put so many of these down, a lot of the time they'll just kind of stand in place rather than try and wade their way through it. I am going to put it in B tier. The damage is decent, it's nothing amazing, but if you make a build around it, it can be pretty strong. Divine Favor is basically Sir Galahad's version of Inspire, and if you're going Christian alignment, you're probably using Galahad. He's a very powerful support defender because of this move. I think it's a stronger Inspire. Not everyone agrees with me on that, but I'll explain. Divine Favor also provides 2 AP to everyone but himself, but it also provides a damage bonus. So I think because of this damage bonus, that makes it a bit better than Inspire, even though Inspire has the cooldown reduction. I just favor the damage bonus more. Holy Smite is Sir Galahad's specific offensive move. It's a melee attack that I think can upgrade to also have a stun. Galahad's damage isn't great. You really want to focus on his defensive abilities with him. So because of that, it's niche. You're generally not going to be using this, I think, on him. You're going to be using your AP for other abilities. Flaming Strike is just the auto attack, the basic attack for Percival and Galahad because their swords are on fire, so B tier. Cleansing Fire is a ranged attack, a ranged spell on Sir Lucan. The damage is moderate because he's a sage, but it does apply burning with an upgrade. I prefer to just do melee stuff with my Lucan, so I'm going to put this in C tier as well, kind of niche. Immolation is probably one of the strongest offensive moves on a defender. This belongs to Percival, tier 3 move. It does have really good AoE potential, so I think I will put this in B tier even though it is an offensive move for a defender. Percival is sort of support, sort of offense, so I think this is fair. Teleport is S tier. It is the best mobility move in the game. You just appear somewhere for 1 AP with a super low cooldown, and it can bypass any sort of obstruction. Everyone knows this is an S tier move. Assault is an A tier move because it is a mobility move for Sir Lancelot. He's a champion. Mobility is a weakness for champions. This has a 150% base damage, I think, so it's an extra hard-hitting move, and it can also apply shock, so just a really good move all around. Radiance is another Lancelot specific move that adds a lot of survivability to him if a lot of enemies start to swarm around him, because it blinds, applies chill, and it applies vulnerability. You don't use this a whole lot, but there are definitely frequent situations where you will get usefulness out of this. Lightning Arrow is probably the strongest marksman move. It belongs specifically to Sir Geraint. It's similar to Chain Lightning into how it determines its targets for the AoE. It just hits enemies within range of your initial target. So because of that and it applying shock, I do think it's a B tier skill just because it has strong debuff capability when the damage may not be so great due to being on a marksman. Firebolt is another basic attack for just Merlin. Illusion is a very powerful ability for Merlin. Super cheap, super low cooldown, baits and attacks from your enemies, which protects your party. Gonna put this in A tier because it's also very good for spell spamming. Raven Swarm, it's a higher cooldown, higher cost version of Slowing Hex because it also does damage and it can spread to a new target when its current one dies. It's just a worse Slowing Hex overall. You're mostly using this for spell spamming, but Slowing Hex is better than this for spell spamming, so I'm going to put it in B tier. Mind Fog, another Merlin ability. We have 3 more of those coming up. Very strong. Force an enemy to waste AP attacking the nearest target to them, which ideally will be an enemy if you're using this ability right. And maybe even use extra AP to move up to them and attack them. And if their debuff resistance is 50% or higher, it just chills them. And this chill effect they don't get resistance to, so it's the full 33% AP debuff. It's cheap, low cooldown, also A tier. Fire Drake, this is Merlin's primary damage move, also A tier. It's a line attack, goes through cover, goes through obstacles, good amount of damage with a good amount of burning damage. Falling Star is Merlin's other offensive move. It's very expensive, but yeah, very high base damage, but very expensive. I pretty much only use this if I need to do an attack and Fire Drake is on cooldown. So, B tier. Fog, it affects the entire battlefield and reduces the damage of all ranged attacks, enemy attacks, and your own. You can get an upgrade so this doesn't affect Merlin. This is useful if you're worried about getting just lit up by enemy archers or spellcasters or whatever, but because it also does sort of harm your own party, I don't find myself needing this a whole lot. I think it's pretty niche, so C tier. Lightning Strike is the basic attack for Fairy Knight. It's probably one of the best basic attacks, but it's still a basic attack, so that goes in B tier. I think this Force Bolt is supposed to be the Fairy Knight version because it's not a basic attack, but Force Bolt is Force Bolt, so I'm not going to put it twice. Force Cleave is also a Fairy Knight move. It's basically his version of Cleave, only it comes with knockback. It's alright. I don't really use this a whole lot. I don't know if I'd call it niche, though, so maybe just lower end of B tier. Ice Lance is an Isolde-specific move. It's a very good move. It applies Chill and Frozen with an upgrade, has good range, good damage, and applying Frozen at a range is just a very powerful debuff. So you use this pretty regularly on her, so I'm going to put it in B tier. It'd be higher if Sage damage was a little stronger, but I think it's still perfectly solid as is. Ice Aura is kind of niche. It's Lady Isolde specific. It can save you some AP, so you can chill multiple targets rather than having to hit them with your basic attack. The damage on it isn't great. It can apply vulnerability. I'm going to put it in C tier. I think it's alright. I just don't think it's really strong enough to be in B tier. Ice Bolt is another basic attack, but for Morgana. Glacial Strike is a Morgana spell. This is going in A tier. Very powerful spell. It ignores cover, and because it's like a drop-down skill, you don't shoot it straight at them like an arrow. Defensive bonuses from cover don't work on this, and it's just a very high damage move, scaling off of Arcanist damage. You're easily going to be doing like around 150 plus damage with this, and it can apply Frozen. It's just a very strong move to snipe a single target. Ice Thorns, also putting this in A tier. 4x4 AoE, so larger than usual. Solid damage. You can easily do a couple hundred damage in total when you're hitting, 3, 4 targets, which is not a hard ask, and applying chill. Applying chill to that many enemies is a very strong debuff. Great for controlling the battlefield. Shield charge. This is an amazing defender move, great mobility, great for engaging the enemy or going to protect an ally. Every defender should have this. I don't think it's quite strong enough to be S tier, but I'd say it's close. Thunderbolt is a Sir Mordred and Morgoth skill. It is a very strong skill. Good damage, can apply stun, ignores cover, it ignores line of sight as well. It's just a very versatile move in terms of targeting. You can hit so many different enemies with it. Also applying a stun, I think it's an A tier skill. And with that, we have tiered all of the active skills within King Arthur Knight's Tale. Looking at it, I think there's a couple of these that I could see kind of floating up or down in a tier. I don't have strong enough opinions on them to commit one way or the other. I think they're fine where they are. As you can see, there are a lot of really good abilities in this game. D tier is actually the smallest tier, which is good. That's how it should be. And S tier being the second smallest, also making sense. You don't want to have a bunch of S tier abilities while the most of them are in B. So, kind of following the bell curve. Now, I do have a lot of experience with this game, close to 300 hours. Really love playing this game, as I'm sure you could tell. So I do have a lot of experience, and I do have a good grip on how a lot of these abilities perform, but that does not mean that I know all. So I am actually really curious if there's any abilities in here you think I may be really messed up on, something's way too high or way too low. Let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts on it. And this was a lot of fun to do. There's a couple other ideas for some tier lists that I plan to do sometime in the future. But for now, this is all I got. Thanks for watching.